Hello, this is Nick from Breaker Press Games, and today I want to talk about the Netflix series Midnight Mass and how you can use it to build your own RPG microsetting. Alright, so right around the first of the year, my friend and I finished watching Midnight Mass, and it was a great series. And being the type of person that watches different media or learns about different things and immediately wants to gamify it, I looked at Midnight Mass and was like, wow, there's a lot that you can take away from this. In fact, I have just recently released my microsetting, the Stennard Courier Volume 1. And when I was researching this and preparing it for publication, I was watching reviews of The Village of Hamlet and downloaded Village of Hamlet, purchased it off of DriveThruRPG so I could reread it. Watched videos, reviews of Against the Cult of the Reptile God, and a number of different things in order to pull the things that people liked about microsettings like those and what they didn't like. And really, all of the answers that I really wanted were in the show Midnight Mass. So let's talk about that. Now, before we get too deep into things, this is going to be spoiler-heavy territory. If you have not watched Midnight Mass yet, it is a great horror TV series on Netflix. And everything that I'm about to tell you about Midnight Mass is going to ruin the surprises in the show. So, before you go any further, if you have not watched the series, note that this is going to spoil the entire series. So, with that being said, let's move on. So, first off, what is a microsetting? Personally, I love microsettings because microsettings essentially take everything that you need in order to drive a story and keep it in a very tight area. Usually a microsetting is going to be a tower, or it's going to be a ship, or it's going to be a small town or a village. And Midnight Mass actually encapsulates that perfectly. So, with this, Midnight Mass uses the setting of Crockett Island. And what makes Crockett Island a microsetting is the fact that it is small, it is isolated, and everyone knows everybody else. And that allows everything to really kind of play off of each other very, very well. The other thing that I really like about Crockett Island, and this ties into it being isolated, is the fact that Crockett Island, you cannot come and go as you please from Crockett Island. You actually have to take the ferry. And this creates a dynamic where, especially for a horror type setting, like the types of games that I enjoy, having that level of isolation where there is no help coming really helps reinforce the gravity of the horror and the isolation. So, the other thing that makes Midnight Mass a perfect microsetting is also the fact that it operates on a very limited cast of characters. And so, Midnight Mass has 21 characters, including the ghost that plagues the main character, Riley Flynn's dreams. But you can take those 21 characters and you can break it down to like 6 or 8 key characters. And I know that when I am creating a microsetting, I like to take the characters and just have at least 3, usually 6 or 8, that play off of each other. Because when you have a dynamic of the good guy and the bad guy, or vice versa, or ambiguously bad, the players still only have two choices. They're going to side with one side or the other, and they're going to have one person that they are sympathetic towards, and then the other is the villain. When you have three characters, now you actually have choice, because it's not just an A or B, black or white dynamic. Now, that third character doesn't have to be a third faction of sorts. They could just be, the character that is the loner or whatever, that is kind of neutral in all things. You couldn't break it into law, chaos, and neutrality. But when you have 6 or 8 characters, you can really have some dynamics going where there is a lot of deep-seated feelings towards each other. Before I get too far into characters, I almost skipped over encounter areas. Now, the map of Crockett Island, though I don't have a map in front of me, in the show, you've got a couple of key areas. You've got the docks, you've got the community center, you've got the church, you've got the police station / grocery store, because it's both. The police station's in the back of the grocery store. And then you've got their respective houses. And so that is where most of the story takes place. There's a couple of other, parts in the show where there's, they do a lot of walking and talking along the road. There is like a separate island that the kids sneak off to hang out on. And there is a couple of scenes where they're just sitting out in the water on a boat. But ultimately, there's just this handful of key areas. And when you look at, like, when I designed the Stennard Courier, same type of thing. The town center was the most important. I'm not good at that. The town center is the, essentially you've got the common fire, and then a handful of businesses, the bar, the community center, and then most of the other places are businesses that are also homes. And so you've got it kept to a very tight little area that has just the essentials that you need in order to be able to help the characters, but also to help drive the story. And you'll notice that most of those areas are common areas, places where people are going to converge and interact with each other. And that's really important as well, because if you base everything on like somebody's house and people don't hang out at that person's house, a movie like House Party, basing everything around one person's house, hey, that's fine. But if you are trying to have, like a town or whatever, you're going to have reasons for people to gather and interact. So with that being said, we'll go to the characters. So as I mentioned, there were 21 characters, including the ghost. And I said that if you break it down to 6 or 8 characters, these are the key characters in Midnight Mass. So you got Riley Flynn. Riley Flynn is, you don't know going into it whether he's the hero. You see that he's got a troubled past, but they do frame him so that you are sympathetic towards him. There are some things that are kind of egregious about him, but that is to set up his arc. Then there is Aaron Green. And Aaron Green, though they try to give a little bit of outsider vibe to her because she had moved off the island and then come back, but ultimately she's pregnant. She's she's the island's school teacher. She immediately comes off as being a sympathetic character, and that's really important to have people that are worth fighting for. Sheriff Hassan is the law, but he's also an outsider. In the show, this is a very Christian town, and he is the Muslim sheriff that is moved to the town. And this sets up a dynamic where most of the town talks trash on him. They don't trust him. And having a character like that in your micro setting that isn't necessarily a bad character, but everybody thinks bad things about, it creates a dynamic where you have to kind of like suss out that information, and that's really, really good for role-playing. Lyra Scarborough, she's a disabled child, and she has that aura of a certain level of helplessness that you feel sympathetic towards her, but you also feel like people need to help her, and you would have players that would want to help her. Things, in any RPG, if you put a child or like, a wayward teenager or even a dog or, some other animal that people are going to feel immediately like sympathetic towards, but also feel like compassion, and they're going to want to help that character, that's going to help drive story as well. And then you've got Dr. Sarah Gunning. Dr. Sarah Gunning is the doctor of the town. She represents science. She's got her own issues at play, but she is a source of information. She ends up being a key component of how Aaron Green and Riley Flynn end up sorting out what is going on in the town. And so you got to make sure that the players have somebody that they're going to be able to go to in order to get information, and reliable information. You don't want everybody to give reliable information, but you want there to be somebody that gives reliable information. And then we get into the bad folks. So first off is Bev Keane. And Bev Keane is set up right in episode 2. Like you see her as being kind of, you don't trust her immediately in the first episode, but by the end of the second episode, I know I hated her. Like, absolutely hated her. And was of the mindset, I hope she gets hers by the end of this. And having a character like that, kind of obvious villain, or somebody that is despicable and not to be trusted, that is going to be a character that the players are going to really want to, they're going to have an emotional, visceral response. I want this person to fail. And that is a fantastic thing to get that role playing going and get them invested in your story. Father Paul is the villain of the story ultimately. He is not as egregious and despicable ultimately as Bev Keane is. But when you think about the dynamic in the Transformers between Starscream and Megatron, it's like Megatron is a tyrannical despot, but at the same time, there are certain things that you might theoretically respect about Megatron, whereas Starscream is a complete weasel. And that dynamic exists truly in Midnight Mass. Father Paul, you don't have this sense that he has this like grand master plan, even though he's the top villain. But he has the fanatical support of Bev Keane, and that is what makes her so great but so terrible. And then finally, there's the Angel. And the Angel is the monster, ultimately the boss monster. But really, at the end of the day, Father Paul is the puppet of the Angel. And so here I've just detailed 8 characters, and they really, that is an entire adventure setting right there. You don't need a full sprawling metropolis. You don't need 10 different locations that your characters, like the Fellowship, travel from place to place to place in order to carry out the adventure. You can have an entire campaign take place in just the town. This is my note card. Just the town of Crockett Island. Or in the case of Stennard, in Stennard. So what about, I mentioned that there were 21 characters, and so what is the importance of those other characters? And those other characters, they help drive the story. Like Joe the town drunk, or the Bull, who is the town drug dealer. They were all characters that kind of were peripheral characters that help drive the story and help facilitate the story arcs of the characters. And then there's just a bunch of minions. Some of them are just the family members of our heroes, or you've got the minions of Bev Keane and Father Paul. And so when you are building your own setting, let's break this down. So as far as you want to stick to a very small area, you want to generate potentially a small map. Oops, there we go. I do this every time. There we go. Left to right, right to left. So just have like a small town with a handful of buildings. In the case of Midnight Mass, as I said, they had the docks, the community center, the church, the police station, and their respective houses. So really, just having 4 or 5 locations, that's perfect. That's enough to be able to have spaces where the characters can interact. Keep your location, your encounter location, small, isolated, and make sure that the characters all know each other. I didn't break it down already, but for example, Riley Flynn and Aaron Green were childhood sweethearts. As I said, Sheriff Hassan was was an outsider, but everybody else is originally from the town. As it turns out, Dr. Sarah Gunning, her mother was a former lover of Father Paul, and as it turns out, that Dr. Sarah Gunning is the love child of Father Paul and her mother. These are things. Maximum spoilers. I gave you the warning at the beginning, but so there's all these reasons why these people are all interconnected. And as I said, the small town setting really reinforces that, because these are the people that they have known their entire lives in most cases, and that creates a web of entanglement between everybody. And that also means that when the characters, when your player characters, let's say, wrong somebody, there is going to be somebody somewhere that is going to be mad that that this other person has been wronged, and that creates tension. And so that is the joy of the microsetting. So we're getting to about 20 minutes, so I'm gonna wrap this up. Hopefully this was beneficial. I think that if you've got a handful of villainous characters and sympathetic characters, somebody that's going to be able to give them information, and just the kind of like loner outsider, somebody that they don't necessarily trust right off the bat. That is a great thing. These are things that you're going to be able to use to drive your setting. One of the things that also is really helpful if you want to reinforce the theme and feel of your setting, something that is not specifically in Midnight Mass but is in the Stennard Courier Volume 1, you will often find it handy to have names prepared for your minions and tertiary characters. So I had put in a name generator so that when people are at the bar or the common fire and they go up to talk to somebody, I can roll a die and boom, they've got a new NPC that they can interact with, and you can figure out your what traits and things that that character has as you go along. But that's how you get from the 8 characters that you write up initially to 21 characters. Creating new NPCs on the whim as the story needs. But yeah, I think that covers it. Go watch Midnight Mass if you haven't already, and really it is a fantastic little story. And as I said, from the standpoint of creating your own RPG setting, your own micro setting, it is a perfect watch. So that's my video. Thank you again for supporting indie games and indie game designers. If you are interested in the Stennard Courier, it will be available from the Goodman Games website shortly, or from their web store. It is on the Breaker Press web store. It's available through Drive-Thru RPG as a PDF. And yeah, you can also support us on Patreon if you enjoyed this video. Patreon is where I put work in progress content. Right now there is stuff for another microsetting called Hillwood Camp that I've been slowly feeding onto there, and more characters and things that are based in Stennard. So go check that out. You might dig that. And yeah, thank you again. This is Nick from Breaker Press Games signing off. You all have a wonderful night, and I will talk to you again soon.